This is Season 5 of Flute Unscripted. Hi, I'm your host, Caity Massoud, and I sit down with a new artist every week and share their stories with you. This podcast is brought to you by Flute Center of New York, the marketplace for flutes. Join us, subscribe, rate, and review us. Use this podcast promo code LISTEN for some special perks. Get $50 off any flute or accessory purchase of $4.99 or more, and 10% off any sheet music order, including free shipping on all orders over $50. Once again, that's code LISTEN. Flutist and educator Keith Underwood is a flute guru. Flutists of all ages and abilities flock to him for his advice and to unlock their hidden potential. Keith's methods are sometimes unusual. He makes use of breathing bags, chopsticks, rhythmic shakers, and spirometers, just to name a few. His out-of-the-box techniques have proven to be effective in addressing the issues of the modern flutist and provide solutions to difficult repertoire too. I had the honor of experiencing Keith's teaching myself as a student of his for 2 years, and I can say that knowing that there are practical and methodical solutions to every problem certainly makes one feel like they can overcome any struggle or obstacle in their playing with creative thinking and consistent work. One thing I didn't get to do much with Keith when I was his pupil was discover more about his personal life and his own path to the career that he's made for himself. It was a pleasure to sit down with my old teacher and get to know this side of him a little bit better. Well, Keith, thanks so much for making time for me and taking the time out of your really busy schedule. I know it's kind of hectic for our interview. I've known you personally a very long time. You're my teacher here at NYU, which is where we are right now. And I owe certainly a lot to you, as do many flutists. It's been almost 40 years, I think, since you've started teaching, which was in the 80s. Yeah. And you've inspired a lot of musicians and have a reputation now of being like the flute guru. I'm curious about your start, because I think a lot of people know maybe more about you now, but not about your beginnings. Can you share how you got started on the flute?
I grew up in Connecticut. I started playing the flute haphazardly. My parents weren't musicians. They were just kind of parents that got you music lessons. So I had piano lessons when I was a kid, and I wasn't particularly into the coordinated enough to figure out the piano.
Yeah, that left hand and right hand.
So then I had flute. I had flute lessons early on, but I didn't really play. To me, I wasn't really playing the flute. I wasn't focusing on getting. I was just random with it.
Sure.
Then the first thing that really caught my attention was this is kind of ridiculous, but my friends and I were really getting it. We were I was more into history and reading medieval history and Lord of the Rings and stuff like that.
Not too surprised.
The first musical thing that I started to really get attracted to was Renaissance music.
Sure.
And and people had there was a record store that sold recorders and things, and was people who played in the New York Pro Musica.
Yeah.
And I started. So I just went from Renaissance music to playing recorder, and then I had the record, and I started to really get into it. And my friends had we started playing Renaissance music, and then one friend of mine built his own harpsichord kit, and then we started playing Baroque music, and I played a little bit of flute, and then I started to get back into playing flute because trio sonatas had flute and things like that. And then we had a little chamber music. We took a chamber music class at a community music school in New Haven called Neighborhood Music School.
Did you know where you were going to go to college at that point?
I was going. Various things, life things occurred. My dad was a teacher at Yale Divinity School, and he had taught at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. And my dad passed away when I was in my senior year in high school. And it was like a big thing in my family, and I just wanted to stay close to
Sure.
New Haven, and you know, I wound up starting to study with Sal Amato, in fall of like my senior year in high school, and then he was such a great flute teacher. I suddenly felt like, whoa, I felt like so much more, and things had just happened in my family, and I just sort of got into music in a way I didn't imagine. Then I went to Wesleyan thinking I was going to be a history major.
Yeah.
And I just kept taking flute lessons, and then it was like the late 60s, early 70s, so everybody was going to college at that time thinking they were going to be history teachers or thinking they were going to be like physicists or something like that.
Yeah.
And they wound up majoring in paper making and flute.
Yeah.
So like I don't think if it hadn't been 1968 and 69,
Things might have been different for
where
you.
everybody was do your own thing.
Yeah.
There's no way that there would be Keith musician.
Yeah.
If it was like 1990 or something like that, I probably would have gone to college and no instrument would have left a case.
Right.
And I would be like panicking. But at the time, everybody was just, like play. And then, I feel like my flute playing sucked sufficiently that like I played chamber music a little bit, in college and things like that. But I feel like, but at the same time, my friends, I met people, I played a little bit of like, I was interested in jazz and rock.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was the era of, Jimi Hendrix and Cream and all these things and blues-based bands. And then a lot of friends of mine from high school were starting to play guitar. And I started playing with little rock bands around there. So, like, some of the best guitar players in Connecticut wanted to play with me, and none of the classical people they wouldn't play with me.
So how do you go from that all the way to Yale with
what happened is that as my college career went along, I started getting better.
Yeah.
And then my teacher Sal turned me on to Rumpal records, and then I became totally obsessed with Rumpal records. As anybody who knows me, they know that I'm fairly off the deep end about Rumpal. And
in every speed imaginable.
Yeah, every speed of Rumpal, like what the hell, I just there would be no Keith musician without there being Rumpal records.
Yeah.
And I saw him play many times, and I just got so into it. And then once again, people sort of, my teacher sort of was retiring from teaching. I started teaching in this little the same music school that I, went to and studied with Grace Feldman. I started teaching a little bit in that school for $6 an hour. And
times have changed.
And then people told me once again, they said, when you get out, before you get out of college, you should take some lessons from this guy, Tom Kniefhanger, who just started Tom had been teaching at Yale for a couple years or something like that. And somebody introduced me to him, and I played for him. And then he took me as a student. And then he was like, whoops, he was a really, really good musician. My other teacher was a great musician, but Tom was a comprehensive, great musician who went to Cleveland Institute as a piano major, and then also played the flute, and he would play, he just, was wonderful to work on flute repertoire with him.
And you two hit it off.
And we hit it off, yeah. And then I studied with him for a year between college and graduate school, not really thinking necessarily at that time. I didn't really think I was going to go to graduate school. I just wanted to study with him.
Right.
And then he liked me, and so it was sort of inevitable that I would go to Yale. And so I went to Yale, and then moved to the city because all my friends who'd been to Yale were moving to the city.
Right. Is there anything else that, you talked a little bit about going back to school for history and that you would have done that. Yeah. Is there a career that you could see your life having gone in that direction instead of music?
College history teacher.
Yeah, for sure. That
was me. Yuck. Yes. Well, but nonetheless, like that
It's not very different from what, I mean, you're a professor.
But I'm a professor, and also I feel like I'm fairly, like, I play, as you know, I play old flutes.
Yeah.
And I kind of love playing instruments that have a history to them. So like this flute sitting next to me, this is Haynes. Actually, Phil helped me buy this Haynes. You know, like I asked him for advice when he was still in Dallas. And this was Tom Knifenger's gold Haynes flute that he was playing when I was studying with him. And this is Haynes number 42,000. Tom had Haynes make it like according to so-called Rampal's specs, because Tom loved Rampal's playing. And then when Tom passed away, his family asked me if I was interested in trying his flutes, and so they let me have this flute for a long period of time before deciding to buy it. And then one way or another, there's a few flutes that I have that are unusually sort of historical.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was studying with Tom, I bought from him. He had a Louis lot that I bought from him that is a 5,000 Louis lot that has a piece of paper, has a letter that Vern Powell wrote to its owner, who was George Laurent, the principal flutist of the Boston Symphony. And Laurent wrote on the back of the letter, said, "Mr. Powell, I can't tell you about I can't tell you when my flute was born, but my teacher, Philippe Gobert, bought that flute for me when I was a student at the Paris Opera, or at the Paris Conservatory, and I won my Paris Conservatory prize playing that flute." And you know, he told little stories about it and stuff like that. So that's Laurent's flute. And then another flute I have was Albert Tipton's old Powell platinum flute. Not a
shabby collection.
So that's I mean, I didn't really think of myself as a flute collector. I just liked the feeling of playing old Powells and old Hayneses and then the French flutes and things like that. And I just stuck in that area. And then now I'm really into Baroque flute.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'll ever be a good Baroque flute player, but I'm fascinated by like the Quantz flute book. I'm reading the treatises.
Mm-hmm.
And I love trying right now. If people who know me over the last 7 years or so, is like, I'm really interested in adapting Baroque flute techniques to modern flute. I feel like there's so many amazing ways that people talked about flute playing in the 18th and 19th century, and that the technique got kind of like support and blasting into the... I mean, there's certain subtleties of the way people talk that's like amazingly wonderful. Well, so that's what I'm into. Right
speaking of old flutes, do you think though that flutes nowadays, modern flutes, are a little too easy to play?
I have that. I'm one of those people that I think if I hang out with modern flute makers, it's not that I'm saying like, I can totally imagine a modern flute that's like totally different from an old flute.
Mm-hmm.
I just think there's a little bit of I like more resistance in flutes. Like older flutes are more resistant, and I even like, God help me, the intonation in old flutes that everybody thinks sucks so badly.
Yeah, that you might be alone on that one.
I actually like it. Yeah. I could imagine you could have different intonation, but not quite as different as things became, because, like, you know, it's always when you shift things around, you gain something and you lose something. Mm-hmm. You think of the high notes as being really sharp, so you make the left hand lower, like a C sharp. You make it lower. You think the low notes are really flat, so you move the right hand upward. But now your low D is more in tune, and your middle D is much sharper. And
I mean, do you think you teach so many people, and I feel like you've taught every generation so far? Do you notice that younger people now that have a lot of modern flutes have a different way of playing because of the flute, or do you think
yeah? I feel like who is it was talking to me? Oh, I teach this guy who collects. There's a really nice guy, Lee Grant, down in Virginia, who I teach on FaceTime, and he loves old French flutes so much, Louis Lots and Bonvilles and things like that. And and he watches my classes online when I'm teaching. He says, you know, I see you teaching young flute players, and they're all playing modern flutes. He says, do you ever have them play your flutes? I said, like, ooh, good point.
Yeah.
He says, like,
it's totally
I think
different.
I think you should, and he's saying, you need to make them blow into, you need to have them try French flutes, and then, because like they're playing pieces by Taffanel and Gobert, and they're listening to recordings of Rampal, but they've never blown into an old Haynes. They've never blown
experience.
into a Louis Lott, and certain makers like Altus and Emmanuel and Arista and people like that they're very aware of French flutes, and they will, certain makers say, well, this is like a Bonneville, like Arista flute. Miguel Arista head joints are like, this is a Bonneville taper. Both Arista brothers. This is a Bonneville taper. This is a Louis Lott taper. They're aware of these things, and the flutes have a certain kind of like Frenchy thing to them within being modern flutes.
Yeah.
But I feel you should have a historical flute petting zoo.
Or historical flute day. Yeah.
Historical flute day, and then you should have like, I'll be the impresario of the historical flute day. You guys, because you guys have like tons of historical flutes at any given time.
Keith loves to geek out about all the different flutes from different eras and is equally intrigued by different genres of music as well. He's been recruited by all kinds of instrumentalist ensembles and vocalists to help identify tools to improve breathing, performing without tension, and playing with ease. He himself is very laid back and easygoing, and when he plays, you can tell he really practices what he preaches. I was fascinated to learn more about how he harnessed those natural traits of his to fill in on last-minute gigs for his mentor and teacher, Tom Neifinger. Tom entrusted Keith with a lot of musical opportunities, and the two had a special relationship. Keith carries on the traditions of Tom's playing and teaching, and even plays on Tom's old flute too. You're really great at adapting, I feel like, and you always fit into any situation, and you're quick on your feet. Is that part of why, when you were studying with Tom, he kind of took you under his wing, and he gave you a lot of gigs that were all very last minute?
Yes, last minute.
Yeah. Were you ever stressed by anything? You seem always kind of cool and collected about...
He put me in awkward situations, like, because he bailed out. I mean, occasionally he bailed out at very last minute. So I played like the dress rehearsal.
Oh my God.
of a concert.
Yeah.
And then the conductor was none too pleased that Tom had bailed.
Yeah.
So like I was walking into a stressful situation.
Yeah.
So welcome to New York.
Exactly. Yeah.
Once
how it goes.
Maybe one of the most. I mean, I played the Titanic song with Celine Dion at Radio City Music Hall.
Was that a Tom gig that got?
No, that was a Tom
that was
gig,
a Keith
but
gig.
I played an Irish. Yeah. I'd been playing Irish Whistle for like Secret Garden for that show, and then when the Titanic movie came out and that became a big hit, Celine Dion was supposed to sing with Barbra Streisand a duet on the Grammys in 1998, and then Barbra Streisand bailed, and then they decided they were going to do that thing, and then somebody heard that I'd done Irish Whistle, and so they called me and said, we're going to do this thing, this song, like, do you think you could play the opening? And I said, I probably can if I have the right whistle. I had a collection of whistles for doing that, and they said, okay, we're going to have the producer call you in like half an hour. So I went out to the Wiz near where I lived, when there used to be places that you could buy CD, and I bought the CD of the Titanic thing, and then like the guy called me like half an hour later and said, and I'm taking whistles, and he's just like, so you think you could do it? And I went, and I said, so, okay, get down to Radio City Music Hall by 4 o'clock, and then it was like that. And that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that sounds stressful, but you did it.
But I did it.
Pulled it off.
Yeah, no, and once I did a thing that was a musical that was being recorded at the Public Theater that was by the guy who wrote Hair and stuff like, and that was a recording that was through no retakes and stuff like that. And somebody called me at the last minute because the flute player had an injury, and I had to play the recording session without ever having heard the music.
Oh.
They just put
no
the music.
Pressure.
Yeah, things like that.
Yeah,
that's the stuff.
But I think it's suited to you. I don't know. You seem to to
one of the nicest
off of it.
One of the nicest things, like as far as trying to be adaptable. I mean, I love old flutes, and I love like trying to figure out where's the scale on this thing and stuff like that. But when I was in Japan once, I was playing a concert at, there's a store do you know the store called Theobald, as in Theobald Boom? Yeah,
Berm,
it's like the old flute store of Tokyo.
Oh.
They only sell old instruments. And they sponsored me doing a concert because I played old instruments, and they said I was going to play like a wood flute that I'd gotten in Brazil. I was a conical Berm flute, and then in the plane trip going over there, that flute, the head joint cracked.
Oh no!
And a flute that had lived in Brazil for a century, and then now it's in a plane overhead.
Yeah.
But the head joint had cracked, and I said I really wanted to play this thing on a wood flute, the Bach partita on a wood keyed flute. I didn't play Baroque flute at that time, and they said, well, here they came they laid out a bunch of wood flutes, and I sort of picked through wood flute, and then this guy who had been at the store when I was like there the year before, a guy who had hung out with me a teeny bit, came up to me and he said, I would like you to play my flute. And it was like a conical bore Louis Lott.
Wow.
Which was the most beautiful flute. And he came up to me right before I went on. I had one wood flute. He came up to me and says, I want you to play my flute. And I played like a C sharp. I said, okay. And I played the Bach partita on that flute. Yeah. And then when the concert was over, I said, I can't believe that flute's so amazing. I can't believe you were willing to give. He says, I would never lend that flute to anybody but you. Yeah. And he said, because when I heard you playing at the shop, last year, it seemed like when you played these different flutes in the store that you asked them what they wanted to play like. So I knew you wouldn't play. You would like want to know what my flute wanted to play. So that was like about the nicest thing that
it's a compliment right
ever
there.
said to me. So yeah.
Do you feel like I didn't know that about your dad passing away when you were young, and then Tom was kind of like a surrogate father to you too, and then he passed.
Were sort of surrogate fathers.
That must have been tough to lose them. Yeah.
It was like it's like you lose your dad, and then you suddenly are around and not really thinking you suddenly are around these really strong personalities, but I don't know whether I would have been the same. A tragedy, in a weird way, sometimes that sort of like makes you like want
to carry on the legacy in a way.
Or like my dad was a history teacher, and I was going to be a history teacher, and then music it became like I just immersed myself in music. So I think I had a weird kind of fixation on playing better, and on playing classical music. And a lot of people, people say, oh, who encouraged? In a certain way, a lot of people discouraged. They thought I was starting too late.
Yeah, because relatively speaking, it is later than a lot of people.
They thought I was starting too late, and they were like trying to discourage me from to disabuse me of like including. I love Julius Baker, but including him. Yeah. I played for him a friend of mine had a lesson with him. I was going to think of studying with him. I played for him, and he said like, okay, well, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm thinking of going to graduate school. And Julius Baker said to 19-year-old Keith, you couldn't get into graduate. There's no school that would take you playing like that. And I was like, well. Yeah. And then like 5 years later, I met him at a festival and played duets with him, and I hoped he didn't know who I was.
Did he? Do you know if
I don't think so.
Yeah.
He was like, wow, where did you come from? And I'd been studying with Tom, and it's like, like, that's one thing I'd say, like, when you're young, you can think, like, you can be told that you're really bad, but if you keep your focus, like, you can learn things, and then, like,
there's a big learning
young
curve.
people can change so far, so fast, so that you can not get in the school of your choice or any school, and you could say, like, ooh, I don't know whether this is the right thing to do, but if you have the right information and you put things together, it's like 5 years later you're a different animal.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people from my evolution by saying, like, I was pretty bad at times that I should have been a lot better.
Yeah. It makes you not discount anybody.
Yeah. So, like, I've been through this with lots of people who were kind of low flutist on the totem pole at their school, and when I gave them some piece of information, suddenly they got jobs.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Since teaching is a big aspect of what you do at Manus, NYU, and Queens, and privately too, when you're teaching so many lessons in a row, I was just wondering logistically how you stay so fresh and alert for every lesson, because I think a lot of times other teachers could find themselves kind of getting exhausted and fatigued, and you seem to just, like, never end with your energy. Or is that all a facade, Keith?
It's a facade.
Okay.
I'm exhausted. But I don't know. I like the teaching thing I've done for so long.
Yeah.
And people I don't know. My personality is such that, like, people say, are you kind of like mad scientist? Do you sit around, like at home, like coming up, thinking about, like, reading linguistic books and thinking about, like, weird things that you're going to dump on your students and things like that? And I say, like, semi, yes, but a lot of it is that by interacting with different people over time, like, one of the most amazing things to me is, like, so many amazing flute players have played for me.
Yeah.
Including Webb and Bart and all these people. But so many people, I've hung out with so many people, and then I try to come up with something that's interesting to them. So, like, when I come up with a weird technique, like, many of my weird techniques come out of the necessity of teaching some person. So when they say, "Oh, are you a mad scientist? Will you sit home?" I said, "No, you made me what I am."
Yeah.
Like,
it's like the
one lesson at a time.
You.
If I fix somebody by saying something, if I fix something in somebody, and then I poof, it suddenly works really well. It's like it came out of that interaction with that person. Well, so I don't think I would have, despite having really good teachers, I don't think I would necessarily know how to play as well if it weren't for the students I'm teaching. I really rely on my students to make me better.
Oh, what a perfect one-liner right there.
Ba-boom.
Well, you seem to always have a solution for everything, though. Has there ever been anyone that's just stumped you? I've never heard you say, I don't know. I don't know how to fix that.
No, I don't think that's ever happened to me. I've,
I
click with certain people more. Just it's human nature. Right. Sort of, you click with people. A number of times I've worked with people with, focal dystonia, where their fingers are betraying them, or their embouchures, and that's a pretty stumping thing, because it's like rerouting somebody's.
We just did an episode with Stephanie Mortimer about that, and she shared a little bit about her experience. Yeah. And sometimes that's just like an individual thing. Sometimes somebody can be really far gone, and I've kind of fixed them. Yeah. Other times people can, other times it's a different type of a battle. So I'll take a shot at it. I don't like, if I fix somebody, I don't hang a shingle out saying, like, has fixed focal dystonia. Right. I don't really. Yeah. I like being fairly under the radar. Sure. Like the first time I did a flute convention, somebody said,
we want you to come to LA to do the flute convention. I said, like, well, how do you know about me? And she said, what do I need to do? And I said, shall I send you publicity? And she said, we know you don't have any publicity material. Like I said, like, that's okay. And the person who's the chair of the convention said, we want to have you because we hear your name all the time.
Right, it's
we
true.
Don't see any
You've
publicity
kind of reached
material,
that stage
but we
now.
hear your name all the time. So you must be doing something.
Yeah.
So I rely on that. I don't really rely on.
It's like on the word of mouth and
I rely on the word of mouth. And people say, well, how did you get to Brazil and Japan and Mexico? And I don't have a manager. I just have students from different places. Who,
I just want to share all of your knowledge.
Yeah. Or Airily.
Who I studied with.
Yeah.
I'm without getting into too much detail if you don't want to, but you do travel a lot and you have a really busy schedule. And I know that you've had some health issues more recently. Do you think that impacted your schedule and your outlook on kind of what you wanted to do from then on, or have you slowed down a little bit?
Yes, I have. Relatively speaking, I have slowed down a little bit. I don't really want to do like week-long classes. Yeah, sure. Like the entire summer long. Yeah. And I feel like I really want to make recordings right now.
That'd be great. Yeah, we need more recordings of you.
And then people say, like, have you written a book? No.
Yeah, there you go.
But I think I need to do things like so that people can hear me play. I do like to play. I'm just not the kind of person that like put energy into recording. I'm really happy that I'm about to do a recording with my Brazilian friend.
Is this the friend? I saw a quote online somewhere that you were talking about your friend and that both of you say that you're going to get each other into prison somehow so that you have some time locked up get some things done.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Wow, you saw that quote?
I did. Yeah, I found that. Yeah. Is this the same person?
Teco.
Yeah.
That's one of my Brazilian friends, but it's Leia Freire, who's a great composer who's coming up here, and I'm going to record her music in November. Yeah. With Hadar.
Oh, funny.
And Barbara, my pianist from who accompanies my class in California. But that quote, I can't believe that. I can't believe, because Teco is such a busy musician in Sao Paulo, and I said, like, well, we're not really. Maybe if we can commit crimes and wind up in prison, then we can.
You'll finally have some alone time,
have some downtime,
get some stuff done.
Like, well, I'm not really a criminal type, I'm not either. It's like, well, let's commit crimes for each other.
I'm sure you could think of something. There has to be some fraud.
Shoplifting or something like that.
Tax evasion, that's a good
Tax
one.
Evasion, that'd be good. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to take any more of your time up. It's been really valuable so far, and thanks for sharing everything, Keith.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure having you.
Yeah.
Keith has found the niche that suits him, and it was interesting to hear where he draws his inspiration from each and every student that he interacts with. He's passionate about teaching and sharing knowledge, so it's no surprise that he sees himself as a history professor in an alternate life. I do hope he finds the time soon to put out more recordings and write books, also that we have a little bit more of his insights at our fingertips. Until then, you can check out what Keith is up to on his website, keithflute.com, and access his archival masterclasses and seminars. Thank you, Keith Underwood. Recordings on this episode highlight Keith's playing and include the Cimarosa Concerto for 2 flutes, Isomorphic Plenum by Harold Oliver, and Tenzone by Chester Biscardi. This has been an episode of Flute Unscripted. This podcast is sponsored by the Flute Center of New York. Visit our website at flutesforsale.com for the largest selection of new and pre-owned instruments. Remember to use this podcast promo code LISTEN for discounts on flutes and sheet music. Special thanks to our owner Phil Unger, the Flute Center team, and Stefan Huskoldson for our theme music.